Welcome to Season 2 of The Animal Highlight. This season is focused on animals and sound and has been extracted from Season 4 of the Animal Turn podcast, which was originally aired in 2021. In this season, I'm joined with a co-host, and I'm delighted it's Hannah Hunter, who's a friend and colleague of mine from Queen's University. Hannah is a PhD candidate in the Geography Department at Queen's University and an active member of the Sonic Arts of Place Laboratory at Queen's University, which is also a sponsor of this season. Her research explores the intersections of animals, sound, and extinction, and Hannah is particularly interested in the intersection of how we can build relationships with distant and lost beings through sound, and how sound might be a potent force for representing and challenging the fourth mass extinction. We kick off this season looking at noisy urban nightingales. Okay, welcome back to the Animal Highlights, everyone. As you know, I started these highlights in Season 3, and it was kind of a bit of an experiment, actually, to see what they would sound like, because I really wanted to start to bring animals a bit more into focus. This season's Animal Highlights are going to be done by a good friend of mine and a graduate student in the S2E1 lab, and that's Hannah Hunter. Hi, Hannah. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Hannah and I have had loads of conversations about animals and about sound and about all sorts of things. And Hannah's actually doing her PhD related to sound and animals. Could you perhaps maybe just give us a snippet of what you're doing and what your interests in sound are?
Sure. So I am broadly interested in historical bird sound recordings. So some of the earliest ones from around the period of 1910 to 1950. And I'm especially interested in recordings of birds that are now critically endangered or extinct, so that we can't listen to in the wild. So we kind of have to go to these historical sources to listen to them. And I'm interested in how that changes our relationship with those animals, how it's different to represent animals through sound than it is to represent them through photos or taxidermy.
Fascinating. And I know you're going to join me in the grad review, so we're going to hear more about your research then. But for now, you are going to take charge of the Animal Highlights this season. So it's kind of a weird thing. It's the first time I'm handing over the baton to someone else and the microphone in the show. So this is like a big moment for the Animal Turn. But I think that in your capable hands, we're going to learn a lot about animals in these highlights. So which animal are we focusing on in this episode?
Going to be focusing on the common nightingale. I think first, listening to what a nightingale sounds like. So one of the things that you and Brian talked about in your interview is about how animals change their sounds in response to urban noise. And I wanted to elaborate on that a bit with the example of nightingales and urban birds in general. So a long time ago, I saw this article in the New Scientist, which was published in 2004, but I must have seen it more recently, which proclaimed that urban nightingale songs are illegally loud. And so this came from research by a fellow called Henrik Broom, who found that the songs of nightingales in Berlin can be as loud as 95 decibels. So that's about as loud as if you stood next to a chainsaw 1 meter away. That would be a similar volume. And when they say it's illegally loud, this is because it's about 8 decibels higher than European law would permit workers to be exposed to without ear protection. So pretty loud. And you don't expect birdsong to get to those levels. But the explanation for this is that as cities have gotten louder and louder, urban nightingales have had to change both the frequency and volume of their calls in order to survive, especially their alarm calls. So this is known as the Lombard or the cocktail effect, where birds in cities have had to adjust their songs to be heard much like a person would need to at a crowded party. So if you and I were at a party back in the old times and it was getting louder and louder, we would also have to get louder, or maybe subconsciously speak in a different frequency in order to hear each other. So in terms of urban spaces, the soundscapes of cities are often made up of quite low frequency sounds. So if you think about like the hum of a car engine, it's quite low. And so urban birds will sing not only louder, but also at higher frequencies. And also at different times of day when the noise is reduced. So they might not sing during rush hour, but they will sing in the early morning. And so you might have heard of the ecological niche hypothesis. And there's something similar, which is the acoustic niche hypothesis, which kind of posits that there is a limited amount of acoustic space, and different animals have to find and exploit different acoustic spaces. And so that's what the Nightingales are doing. I think this is quite a cool case in a way, because it reminds us that animals aren't just passive victims of humans' actions, but they're also very resilient and adaptive. So the nightingales are able to reconfigure their behavior to survive in the changing acoustic landscape. But unfortunately, not all species are able to alter their songs because humans are taking up so much of that limited acoustic space. And as I'll discuss in a bit, song altering is not necessarily good for birds. As well, noise can be a major stressor to birds. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute of Ornithology found that zebra finches, for example, exposed to noise can experience rapid aging and shorter lifespans, which is what we would probably expect from noise pollution. But the extent to which nightingales and other birds have altered their calls in response to urban noise, of course, was made clear during the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you'll remember during lockdowns, everyone suddenly noticed the birds again because there was a decrease in urban noise in planes and transport and everything like that. And so a study from San Francisco found that the reduction in traffic noise led to a quite dramatic shift in song frequency in white-crowned sparrows. They found that in the absence of noise, sparrows switched to a lower amplitude, more complex songs that had an increased communication distance. So because of this, the researchers suggested that sustained periods of urban quiet would be beneficial to the sparrow population in terms of demographic recovery and species diversity. So they were able to communicate in ways that were more efficient and also more successful in terms of attracting a mate or communicating with each other. And that obviously happened quite quickly. So it shows the extent to which birdsong is adaptive and responsive to the soundscape around it. All this to say that the urban soundscape has a significant impact on bird communication, which of course is key to their life worlds and survival. Though it is amazing to see how they're able to alter their songs in response to changes in the landscape. These noises and noise response changes may often be detrimental to the species. That's my tale about urban birds and noise. So I wanted to share with you all today.
That's fascinating. And, nightingales, I was just having a look now, that nightingales, they have one of the biggest repertoires of apparently bird sounds. I was saying that they can make over 1,000 different sounds, which is just incredible. When you start to actually pay attention to these sounds and you kind of get a sense of how varied and diverse they are. So I guess it's not surprising that a bird like a nightingale is able to respond that way. And just the sound you were saying, the intensity of that sound, I had no idea that a bird could produce sound. What did you say there? It's equivalent to being how far from?
Being 1 meter away from a chainsaw, yeah.
Whoa.
So
I never thought I'd hear the word chainsaw nightingale in the same. Right.
But it's also, when I first read that article that said they were illegally loud, I was thinking, and they go over kind of the noise codes. And I think, if you think about some of the things you talked about in the animals in the urban season, about how animals can be kind of spatially transgressive, in this way we can kind of think of them as also being sonically transgressive in some ways. But I don't think they face too much persecution over. Nightingales have, luckily, what we consider as being nice songs. Okay. So them being loud isn't as much of a problem, but that's less the case with seagulls and other sounds that we might not think are as nice.
That's fascinating. Yep. So thank you so much for bringing nightingales into focus for us a little bit, and for some of those cool facts and bits of information for us to think about when hearing birds in the city.
Thank you to Animals in Philosophy, Politics, Law and Ethics for sponsoring the Animal Tone podcast. Thank you also to the Sonic Arts Studio and the Sonic Arts Place Laboratory, who were sponsors for the 4th season of the Animal Tone podcast that was focused on animals and sound, where, of course, these animal highlights were extracted from. A big thank you also to Hannah Hunter for co-hosting this season of the Animal Highlight with me. This episode was produced by myself, edited by Christiaan Mentz, and the logo and episode artwork were created by Rebecca Shen. This is The Animal Highlight with me, Claudia Hirtenfelder.